It's again not quite the Gunners Club, but I tell you what, it comes close. I like it.
Thanks for having us here, Chris. What do we have before us?
Well, you guys have got a Springbok lager. We added that to the menu probably 18 months ago when we had a group of South African people come through, and so it's based on the Castle Lager, which is probably not something that people are particularly familiar with beer, but certainly if you watch any of the Test cricket, anything from South Africa, it's got the big Castle logo on the field.
That makes sense now.
Now, you may not know, but we did a video a couple of months ago called Out of Africa, where we spoke about some African beer, and we tried some biltong as well. Probably didn't go down as well as we wanted.
Not my favourite. The views were quite good though.
Well, when these groups of guys have come in, they've come in and made some of our favourite beers, but they've made some South African ones like the Springbok Lager, but I used to put on barbecues, and I get the boerewors for them, which is the circular sausage, and which you cook in a big spiral, and then they just break bits off it, and that's how you're traditionally supposed to.
I don't remember getting an invite.
Are you South African?
No, but I like a long sausage.
We did a video recently on the craft brewery industry. What got you into it?
Well, it's a funny story. I'm a big believer in fate, and things happen for a reason. But I've never been, funnily enough, for a brewery owner, I've never been a massive beer drinker. But I like to learn new things, and so I got one of those little craft brew kits for home, just a little extract brew kit. And I did a couple of those beers, and I liked them and shared them with family and friends, and it wasn't really becoming a hobby, but it was the sort of thing I was interested in. And my wife was looking for something a bit different for a present, and she found this beer brewing experience at a place called the Beer Factory in Keilor Park, and I came along, did a beer, and my background is business, and so I'm fascinated in particularly business I haven't had anything to do with. I thought I'd like to learn a bit more about the business, and I was asking the guy who owned it, and he was telling me about it, and he said, I've been in it for 12 years and it's actually on the market. And I said, do you mind if I ask? And I had a figure in the back of my mind what it would be worth, how it all got set up, and it ended up being significantly cheaper than what they paid to set it up about 12 or 13 years earlier. I'm thinking, well, there's some value right there for something with the existing equipment, existing infrastructure, existing customer base. Started to make the transition away from what was called a brew on premises brewery, which was predominantly people coming in, selecting a beer like you guys have done earlier today, and then coming back a few weeks later to bottle it up, to really the backbone of our business is keg sales. People have got their own little home tap systems, and as the name suggests, keg swap. I say to people, you can come in and get a full keg of beer quicker than you can change a gas bottle at Bunnings.
And that's true.
Yeah. And you ring up, order what you want, and we've got, as you know, very wide selection. Now, not all of them we've got ready at any time, but probably at any stage we've got 20 different beers available to select. And even if it's not ready, we'll brew it up and it'll be ready in two and a bit weeks.
Yep.
So pretty much.
If you see us at the Gunners Club, what we're enjoying, usually it's a beer from here.
Yeah, it's great.
Usually from the Beer Factory.
Yeah.
That's right. You just swap it and off we go.
That's it. And we just tried a new one today, a cider. I reckon that's going to go on tap.
That's fantastic, yeah.
I think so.
Yeah, and that's one of the things, having the bar downstairs is great because people get a chance to try some of the beers before they buy. We've got the equipment on display down there, and I think 90% of people who would come in and do a brew session will at the very least have a look at a kegerator and they probably haven't seen them before, had no idea about them, and a high proportion. We would probably, over the year, average one sale of a kegerator a week.
Well, that was exactly my experience.
Yeah.
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 That's how we got into it.
Yeah.
Now,
exactly.
I want to touch on what we call the crisis in the craft brewing industry. I know that you're a numbers man, just like I am, and you've got your own ideas, but I said, don't share them with me just now, because we want to share it in front of the camera.
Sure.
What's your idea of what's happening in the market at the moment for craft breweries in Australia?
Look, it's a very dynamic space. I'll take you back a few decades when I was a much younger tacker, back in around about the late 70s, and this is a statistic I was given late last year, that in America, for example, in, I think it was 1979, before the craft brewing industry took off, there was only something like 45 breweries in the whole of the United States. The capital cost and the infrastructure and the bottling lines, canning lines cost so much money, you had to do it on a massive scale, not at all. All of a sudden there was a company which started the craft brewing, or is renowned to have started it, called Sierra Nevada. Yeah. And so they started...
dairy equipment, I understand.
Was it?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And they came up with the idea of the sort of the pale ales. The original pale ales, we've got an existing India Pale Ale on our recipe, as opposed to an IPA, which is an India Pale Ale, but the original India Pale Ale was actually a dark beer, almost the colour of a stout, probably colour of a 2 years old.
That's a misnomer. How would they call it a pale ale if it's like...
Well, it was actually paler. It was paler than a stout, but it was still a dark beer, but it was still paler than a stout.
Okay.
It was quite a dark beer. So it has some. It wasn't quite as dark as a stout, but that was it. So it was pale in comparison. But it was heavily hopped to make the trip
journey from England
to India. Yep. Exactly what it was, and that's how that came about. So, not to be confused with the IPAs we think of today as the fruity, citrusy, passion fruity
sort of flavours.
Yeah, that's it. The West Coast IPAs,
which are a lot of fun.
Yeah, absolutely. And so that started it. So all of a sudden, the second thing that happened was all these other people started getting into the craft brewing industry.
Bless their cotton socks.
Yeah. But then the Chinese started to make stainless steel equipment that meant you could equip a brewery relatively cheaply. Still hundreds of thousands of dollars, but not multi-millions of dollars and massive floor space that was actually required.
Right.
So the business today, how I see it, and other people might have other opinions, but my observation is massive is good, small and boutique is good. That middle ground is really, really hard. I think I showed you a beer magazine before.
That magazine from 15 years ago.
Yeah. The magazine 15 years ago, but also the current version of it, which had all the beers on tasting, which actually showed something like about 130 different beers. I think there were 2 beers that were in bottles. They've all gone to actual cans. But it shows a number of things. There's massive competition in that market space. They're all after that premium beer drinker in cans, and they need to get shelf space in the Dan Murphys and the Liquorlands of the world, which is fine, but those companies themselves are also going down their own home brand, but you're not going to realise it's home brand. They're going to have something that looks like a craft beer, but if you read the fine print, it says, part of the Colesmire Group or something like that.
Simply if you know the address.
Yeah, or Liquorland, that's right,
That's right.
If it says 500 Taronga Road, Hawthorn, it's part of the Liquorland Group.
Now, I understand you say they're chasing really a small segment of the market. My understanding is about $1 out of 7 that's spent in beer in Australia effectively goes towards the craft brewing industry.
Yep.
But it's such a concentrated industry that we look at the mainstream beers that people are drinking. It's almost 60% Asahi owned for the mainstream. So, I mean, those figures are staggering.
Well, the CUB, Asahi brands, Great Northern, they're massive volumes of beer. And they are what they are. They're very drinkable beers at, a reasonable price. Craft businesses have to compete in other ways. They compete through competition, so they go into all of the beer competitions. We don't go down that pathway. They've got graphic artists who do outlandish cans. They come up with some ridiculous concepts for beers, some of which work, some of which don't, but pretty much all of them are designed to cut through from the morass of different beers. Absolutely.
From the average.
The pastry stouts and the tiramisu beer that you were talking about earlier.
Yesterday I was physically at Deeds Brewery in Glen Iris, which they've spent a bit of money there recently actually. It looks wonderful. And I tried the Lamington beer.
Yeah.
I mean, just because, why not?
Yeah.
But that's what you need, I guess, from a craft brewery. But what I found...
But it's hard to get volume on that stuff. So you can do small batch, but then the small batch, you've then got to get the design of the label. You've got to get the cans printed. Minimum batch of cans is probably 10,000 cans. You can be left with a lot of...
Say that again?
About 10,000 cans is about the minimum batch to get printed. Unless you want to label them, you could get plain cans and just wrap them, because the 2 ways to do it are pre-printed cans or a complete wrap. So that gives you a lot of flexibility there. You've got to keep the labels. But you can be left with a lot of cans, which are not much value,
Yeah.
unless you then overwrap them with something else. And that's just the way it goes. And look, the reason the craft beer is going down the can path, see very few craft beers in bottles, is because the amount of real estate on a can gives them a lot of opportunity to be eye-catching.
Yes.
They can come up with the graphics. They've got all the information they've got there, but they don't have to have a back label, a front label, and a collar label like a bottle does. Yeah, and that's all done separately. Run once through a canning machine, you've got your finished product straight into the box.
Now, Chris, I understand that for craft brewery, really the market at the moment is for millennials, so the younger people are prepared to pay money for that.
Yeah.
What are they drinking?
They've then got to rely on getting into pubs. That they then need a marketing team to be out there knocking on doors to open the taps
Well,
for
they've
them.
got to be fighting for
The real estate, isn't it?
For
That's it.
tap space.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
There's only so many taps available.
Yeah, and it's still out there, but there's a lot of the big bars and hotels that are owned by a certain group who've got contracts with the big brewers, and so they don't have too many open taps. So
Yeah,
you're
that's
competing
right.
for maybe 1 or 2 taps out of 10 or 20 taps
Yep.
in a bar because they've got a contract that basically, it's probably
We have to sell X
anti-competitive,
amount of
but
kegs per month.
they got plenty of lawyers, as you'd know. They've got people in there to work out what the rule is in terms of ACCC, anti-competitive behaviour, and what they're actually able to do.
Yep.
So they will give lip service probably to having other beers there, but they'll be able to provide the full range of beers under that corporate umbrella. But that corporate entity will probably be having refurbishments paid for or subsidised by the big breweries, and so they're then stuck with
I think
that
that's
tap
called
system.
a kickback.
Yeah, well,
Now,
It's-
Chris, you've shared a few ideas as to why you think the industry is probably in peril. You've said things like people buying what they think is a craft beer, it's actually a
Yep.
multinational, fighting for shelf space. I wonder if one of those reasons might be just simply the fact that government is taxing the hell out of the industry.
yeah, and that's it. So there's probably 2 sweet spots. We sit in one of the sweet spots, and there's another sweet spot. Sweet spot is massive, got massive economies of scale, and so therefore the cost per litre in terms of ingredients, in terms of staffing, is going to be relatively small. Yes, the excise is the same for everybody on a per litre basis, but they're going to get the economies of scale otherwise. We're at the other end. One of the good things that the government does is it gives a good cutout to the smaller brewers, the real micro brewers, and we fall into that category.
Okay, beautiful.
So we effectively are not at the point where we pay excise. So we get a full excise rebate at the moment. Doesn't mean to say every month we've got to tell the government what we've brewed, how much the excise would have been, and if we were paying the full excise up over $100,000 a year of excise, even in this
Yeah, but
place.
what would you do without accountants, hey?
Yeah, that's right. So, we know that the whole idea of that is so that the smaller breweries can compete with the large international ones to some extent. But the challenge is we're small and nimble, and we're quite niche. So our niche is people can come and do a beer brewing experience. They can select one of 70 or 80 different beers off our menu, come in, have a beer brewing experience, taste a few beers, come back a few weeks later, and operate probably in 99% of cases, see how a canning machine actually works for the first time.
Is this beer excise spot where you don't have to pay excise because you fall into that category? Is that dependent on literage produced?
Yes, yeah. It's litres, it all gets converted back to pure alcohol.
Okay.
So in a 50 litre keg of beer, there's probably about 2 litres of alcohol. If you bring it back to ethanol at 5%, so at $44 or something per litre, a 50 litre keg of beer has approximately $88 of excise
So
on it.
in other words, in reality, that makes it a disincentive for you to grow to be a bigger company.
To a point, there's an incentive for us to grow to that point, and we can double in size at least and still not hit that excise cap.
Okay.
Yeah. But beyond that, there is definitely a challenge, and those mid-sized craft breweries are finding that the challenge.
Right.
They still, it doesn't mean they hit that litrage and all of a sudden they've got all this back pay to pay. They've still got that, even CUB, their first 300,000 litres of pure alcohol that they brew a year is probably going to be excise free.
Oh.
So everybody gets it,
Okay.
but, you know, half a day's brewing at CUB would see it for the year. So they're brewing 365 days a year.
Yeah.
And so what we don't even use in a whole year, half a day's brewing at CUB would probably see their excise cap used.
Is there anything you'd like to see to make the industry healthier in Australia?
People drinking more beer? Okay.
Well, I mean, we've got
to a
such
point, that's up to
concentrated
us,
market.
really.
We've got such a concentrated market though, at the moment. Is there anything that the government could do to make it easier for new entrants and for less concentration in the market?
Well, when you think that, other than take aside the pub market where people have been drinking beer on tap, probably 99% of beers that are drunk at home are going to be drunk through some sort of container. Glass container, aluminium container. There's no real incentive for, if there was an incentive other than just the not filling your recycle bin each month, or now saving them all and deciding if you want to take all of the empties down to one of those recycling centres, then that in itself is an environmental thing. If you take one keg of beer, that is around about 54 aluminium cans that is not being actually used.
But the recent statistics are showing that people, I mean, when I was growing up, 50s, 60s, 70s, like that, you'd be going to the pub after work, dropping 3, 4, 6 pots before you go home, and then maybe a traveller with you as you go.
Yeah, that's right.
People aren't going to the pub to have a drink anymore.
No,
people are going to the pub to have a meal and have a drink.
Yeah. But that drink might be a beer, it might be a wine, might be a mixed drink.
Yeah, but that beer culture of going to the pub, having a half a dozen before you go home, that's gone now.
Yeah.
That's no longer there.
Yeah.
People are drinking at home more.
But,
people
I don't know if there's such a
takeaway.
concept as a working man now, but, the prices are not working man prices.
No, definitely not.
One of my sons went to one of the sort of destination breweries.
Yep.
Happened to be Australia Day, so there was a surcharge there.
Of course there was.
Is his shout 4 pints, $84 for 4 pints of beer. So, that's a luxury product by any stretch of the imagination. Now,
so you could drink
we charge
very good wine for that price. Quite frankly.
Yeah. Well, now we've put our prices up, but our pints are only $10 a pint. Our pots are $6.50 or something like that. So, we've had to put our prices up as well because our ingredients goes up, our rent goes up, our rates go up, everything goes up. Our labour cost goes up.
Yep.
Yeah.
So, people are drinking more at home.
Yeah, for a number of reasons. We've got a lot of repeat customers, and if they can, if people don't want to do their own home brewing, which is certainly very cheap, but the results can be pretty varied.
Time consuming, and you've got better things to do.
If you wanted to do something like our Rock and Timber, for example, at home, yes, you can brew it, but you've then got to go and probably buy 3 or 4 different types of hops to do all that hopping at home. Whereas here we've got it. Somebody can come in for $100 for a keg, which is the equivalent of 2 and a bit cases of beer, 2 and a bit slabs of beer. They get it at home, they pour it. They don't have to carry the slabs of cans or bottles. Don't have to dispose of that. And it's a nice fresh beer, freshly carbonated, straight off tap. And as we all know, tap beer's great.
You can put it into a can or bottle it or can it here if you wanted to as well. But it's certainly a hell of a lot more convenient to have it in a keg.
Yeah, that's right.
For sure.
A carton of VB these days at the fridge, roughly, what are we talking nowadays? 60
Probably about
$60.
$60, yeah.
$60.
Yeah.
So our equivalent of that, $95 a keg. So 2 and a bit slabs, so you're probably looking at equivalent of $40, $42 a slab.
So what gets me, and I can't get my head around it, although I can when I think about the fact they've got the brand name, you buy a slab of VB or Foster's for $60. And
can you still buy Foster's?
Well, I was at
Certainly can in America, I think.
I was at Dietz Brewing in Glen Iris where you can buy a slab of their draft for $55.
Yeah.
even cheaper. And we were talking about making things, when you start to have volume, your labour is a lot less expensive because you're brewing 10 times as much for one unit of labour, basically. And they're still able to charge more effectively than a microbrewery. For me, I have a lot of trouble getting my head around that because labour is so precious, it's so expensive, but also to have something of a unique identity to the area where you live, that's something I think that's worth investing in. And I think it's something Australians aren't getting. But to me, it indicates Australians are prepared to pay too much for a generic beer.
I agree with you.
Good.
And it's funny.
Glad you do.
It's funny how you say that, because we have minimum of once a week somebody comes in and says, I didn't know you were here, and gee, I'm glad I found you, because they've been buying kegs of Carlton.
Yes.
The cheapest keg you'll probably find of CUB Carlton Draft anywhere, very generic beer, is over $400. We will sell
That's right, the old 18er.
Yeah, the 50 litres,
Yeah.
I'm not that old, I don't know the exact...
well, you used to buy an 18er or a 9er.
But, the 50 litre ones.
Gallon.
That's right, gallons. And we sell that same beer for $240. So
wow.
People, and you had the VB before, probably not exactly the same, but for probably almost $200 price difference, people are saying, I'm happy to have the $200.
After the first few beers, you don't notice the difference.
5 kegs, I paid for my whole tap setup.
Yeah.
What do you see us drinking in 10 years' time? I mean, the millennials will come through and then we'll have the next generation. What do you think we'll be drinking? Will it be more climate-based, just like with wines, where, with wines we're starting to get a palate for the South Italian
we're in
wines?
Melbourne, 4 seasons in one day. That's why you have to have 70 beers on our menu,
That's right.
We can be selling different beers at 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. to 5 p.m., based on the climate in Melbourne. But I really hadn't thought that much. I certainly think hops is still in a real developmental phase. They're doing some really great stuff right throughout the world in terms of hops cultivation, and that's where it is, because you can combine your malts and everything, but malting is malting. You've got malted barley. There's not a lot you can do. The malting process is the process. You can toast it a bit more. There's not a lot more you can actually do with your base.
I know you're playing with wheated barley. Wheated barley as well.
So we'll do something like a Hogarden clone of that. Yeah, so a wheat beer will do for that. Even the Rock and Timber that we make, that has a litre of wheat beer in it, as well as the normal malt beer. So we'll actually combine them sometimes as well.
I was blown away with those hops where you were pulling them out of the fridge and they were all different.
Yeah.
And that's hops is hops, but they're not.
They're so aromatic, aren't they?
It's amazing.
Yeah, people will actually ring up and say, I want to book one of your beer brewing courses, and I say, well, it's a beer brewing experience, really. You'll probably learn a bit of stuff, but it's not a course. It doesn't mean that you can go home and do it. We've got very different equipment than anybody could afford to actually have at home. It's more a commercial style of brewery, but you'll get an appreciation of all the factors that actually go into the beer. You get a chance to taste the base malt, and as you know, it doesn't taste anything like a beer. The base malt that goes in there, it tastes a bit like Nutrigrain or something. You said there's a bit appley. I'd say it's sort of a Nutrigrain sort of taste. You can taste the actual grains that go into it, and you eat it, and it tastes a bit like a muesli. They're the sort of basic ingredients that go in. Then the hops.
The sweetness of the wheat really surprised me, actually.
Yeah, because what's happened in that malting process is, as it's taken from just effectively a seed, and the heat and the moisture cause it to germinate. And about 3 days later, they stop that germination process, knock off the little green shoots, and then toast it. And what that does, it actually changes the whole seed and unlocks all the enzymes and creates, rather than just a hard seed, all of the sugars that are inside it. Yeah. So it's something they found years ago.
Well, Chris, this has been an education.
Thank you.
And an experience. And you can...
We'll be seeing you in a few weeks to come back and see how the brew you made earlier turns out, and I think it'll turn out to be an absolute ripper, and you'll be enjoying that for a month or two to come at the Gunner Bar.
I think we will.
Yeah.
And you have an open invitation to join us, and perhaps...
Well, what I might do is, when you tap that keg, maybe I'll be there to help you tap that keg.
Oh, here we go. I like it already. I like it. I think
And we can.
that's a date.
And if we've got any questions that we didn't get to
in a very
today,
platonic sense.
yeah, absolutely. Didn't take it any other way.
And you're always welcome to join us as well. And if you like what we do, join us for more adventures.
Don't forget to like and subscribe, guys. Catch you on the next one.